Last night was the second round of the Brazilian elections, and Brazil has again a left-wing president. So Lula, who everyone thought his political career was over something like 7-8 years ago because of the scandals that he was involved, somehow is president again. He won Bolsonaro, who was president for the last years, in an election that was very tight. Bolsonaro actually did better than the polls expected, but Lula is president again. This means that from 2003 till 2022, out of these almost 20 years, Brazil had the left-wing president for something like 15 of these years, although I'm not very good in maths. So, questions to put on the table. Number one, do we have a new pink tide in Latin America? Pink tide was the name in the 2000s of one country after the other of Latin America having a left-wing, but not really a communist leader. That's why pink, not red. And why did Bolsonaro lose, or why did Lula win? And what does this mean for Brazil? So we're discussing this with Mark Pellegrino, and whom you already know, and Matheus Pacini. Matheus is running objectivismo.org. So objectivist movement is on the rise in Brazil. If you hear Tal or other people who have been there talking about Brazil, they're very excited. It's one of the places in Latin America where our activism is doing quite well. The ideas of Ayn Rand are spreading, obviously not spread enough to stop a left-wing president from winning or to stop his opponent to being a right-wing populist who is not close to our ideas. Anyway, enough from me. Matheus, were you surprised by the results, and what's your first reaction?
Well, so first of all, we get Lula elected again. Lula was president from 2002 from 2010, and he was followed by Dilma Rousseff, who later on, after 2 to 3 years, got impeached due to some fiscal irresponsibility. And Lula was condemned, went to prison for several corruption scandals over the 2010 decade. And our Supreme Court decided he was innocent because of some administrative procedures that should have been held elsewhere.
So let's be clear on this, Matheus. Let me repeat what you just said, because I want to emphasize on this. It's not that that there was a court that said to Lula, we have examined the things you've accused and we find you innocent. He was released because of a mishandling of his case by the previous court, but not on something that has to do with the essence of the case. Am I right?
Exactly. The proofs are there. If we restarted the process right now, it would have the same result, because he is corrupt. He was not. He was never innocent. Especially if you look to his, if you see the political programs and political debates, it is funny because he always says, I was people made me. The Supreme Court declared I was innocent. He never says I am innocent, because he knows he's not innocent. He just used the passive voice. Somebody turned myself innocent somehow, but I am not innocent. So he never says I am innocent. Just I was like pardoned, and for some reason. But so it is really sad, because it is also difficult to explain to people from other countries what happened, because it's just crazy. I mean,
but I'm in a country where the socialists were in power for many, many, many years, and there are so many scandal stories. And as usual, a couple of people go to prison, and maybe you could tell it's almost unjust, because you find 1 or 2 people who were doing exactly what everyone else was doing, and they're like so the gang turns on these people and say, okay, now they're the ones who are going to take oral sins. But in countries with where the state controls vast parts of the economy, these things are almost part of the system. That's why I have almost quote sympathy to people who often say, oh, you know, okay, there were some bribes here and there, but everyone does it. And indeed, everyone does it when you're a socialist government. Again, we've seen this many times, not only in Latin America, but also in Europe. Before we go back to Matheus to tell us a bit more about what is the new plan of Lula, because in 2002, 2003, the plan was the new 21st century socialism, which coincided with a period where raw materials and things that these governments had a monopoly on were quite high in the market. And this is why you saw even Venezuela for some years doing relatively well. And of course, when these prices fell, these economies completely collapsed. Venezuela with Brazil less so. But Mark, first reaction. So on the one side, you have someone like Bolsonaro. People have called him an Brazilian Trump, allegedly a bit better than Trump in economics, but in everything else, basically equally bad, or if you're one of his supporters, equally good with Trump. So what's your first reaction?
Well, I mean, when you were talking about the corruption of your country, Nikos, I was thinking about the corruption of my country, and I'm struggling to think of a country that isn't mostly socialist in nature. I think America has gone from a mostly capitalist country to a social democracy now. I think the left has been pushing for it for 130 years. They've finally gotten what they want, and there's very few intellectual vestiges out there of liberty. So to me, this political conflict between right and left seems reflective of the old statism of 1930s coming back to haunt us again. There's no real independence out there. There's just variants of socialism fighting with each other.
So let's focus then on this particular case. So why would a Brazilian vote for Lula? In terms of, if we add also the center-left party, you could say that the vast majority of the last 30 years, Brazil had either an outright left-wing or a left-leaning government. And were the results that good that the sentiment was, okay, let's give these people another chance? So how can the left be so successful in Brazil? Is it their track record? Is it something else? Are they maybe very charismatic in terms of their message, their political campaigns, in which case maybe there's something that we've missed? So what's happening? Why did Brazil elect Lula?
Well, I'm gonna answer the first question you asked about, like a pink revolution in Latin America. We see nowadays in Chile, Colombia, Argentina, Nicaragua, and many other countries where you have Lula's friends governing, and the results are terrible. Both economically, there are protests in the streets, and probably the same is going to happen and repeat itself in Brazil next year, because the left is just, as Mark said, copying the same projects of the past. I mean, technically speaking, the same things that they tried to do in some level in the Soviet Union is being replaced right now. I mean, of course, given the different natures of the systems, particular to each country. I mean, the essence is always the same. It's government spending, it's social welfare programs, and giving people the sense that they cannot live by themselves. So it's really an orchestrated program where you try to inflict damage in all, for example, in all levels, philosophical levels. So in the metaphysics, in the epistemology, in ethics, in politics, of course, aesthetics. So they just have a coordinated attack on everything. So the left is really in the business of destroying everything. And
the question is, though, what is the right doing, though? Because the right in Latin America has the stain of brutal dictatorships in the past. So there was a right that was very illiberal, not liberal. So, for example, you mentioned Nicaragua. How is it that Ortega is still president? I mean, these are people who, again, have failed miserably to do anything to take these countries out of the very low level of economic development they have. So is it that the left is doing something good? Is it that the right is doing something particularly bad? What is it?
I mean, for example, if you compare Brazilians to Venezuelans as well, let's say, Brazilians they like to receive things. So they like the welfare state. Most of the population loves it and receives it in concrete. But they, so far at least, they do have some kind of place where the state cannot touch. They have like a place where you cannot touch their freedom somehow. I cannot explain, but it seems that you cannot go beyond a certain point, and then Brazilians start to go to the streets. There is this thing that I cannot explain, where they say, well, it's enough, let's stop there in this madness.
It's a bit like Greece in that we want the state, but at the same time we tax evade all the time. So we want to keep the state at arm's length, but at the same time we want the state to tax someone else to give us the stuff.
Exactly. I believe that this is a kind of a psychological, a philosophical conundrum that goes inside of people's mind, because they have these many philosophies fighting against each other inside their minds. And then there comes a point where I think things connect and they start to express themselves. But really,
I feel like hypocrisy and inconsistency are sort of the results of holding up moral values that are anti-life. And so, they keep trying to implement these values through the political system over and over again because they're convinced that they're right. They've been convinced from kindergarten through 12th grade. And then in college, they have this notion that altruism is good and the state is the means through which you can enforce altruism, but they can't live that way. So when you set up that moral dichotomy in life, you're going to find corruption and hypocrisy everywhere.
And it's funny because there is an essay from Rand, I think it's Collectivized Ethics, where she says that the first question is, what about the poor? And this is the first question the regular Brazilian asks when you talk about objectivist ideas, pro-freedom ideas. But what about the poor and the health system and education and the poor? How he is going to get education?
Yes,
so
need becomes the primary moral animating force behind everything. I mean, I think Rand talked about that pretty extensively, didn't she? She talked about how it's not really whether or not the programs that they espouse work. It's about whether they're moral or not.
Exactly, because my question: what has Lula done for the poor? So it's not that his previous times as a president. Again, this guy was in power from 2003 or 2002. You said so, but with the break of Bolsonaro, this party has been in power for the majority of the 21st century, either with Lula or with Dilma Rousseff. So, and again, this is a myth that comes back time and again in Latin America, but also in other places. Greece, an example, that, there was this neoliberal hegemony. Where was this neoliberal hegemony? From the 1990s. How many governments in Latin America were actually pushing for a, quote, neoliberal agenda? The usual example they throw is Chile, which I think is a huge myth. That the dictatorship was pushed by the Chicago boys to get rid of Allende, and Pinochet came with a plan to impose these reforms. This is a massive, massive, massive myth. One day I'm going to do a whole episode on the myth on Chile. Pinochet was a horrible thug who did not come to power to impose these reforms. He imposed these reforms at some point when everything else he was doing was not working. Yeah. But Brazil is an excellent case study. They've had leftist governments for the majority of the last 30 years, and somehow it's every time they're against neoliberalism. Where is this neoliberalism? Where does it come from? How exactly is the left in Brazil, quote, fighting neoliberalism, where they've been the party in power for the majority of the last decade?
Can somebody explain to me this new monster that has risen up on the horizon called neoliberalism? Because it seems to be on everybody's radar now as the cause of pretty much every calamity that we have.
Well, it's been in Latin America, the boogeyman, at least since the late 80s. I did a whole episode with Elan Journo and New Idea Live, Ayn Rand Institute's podcast last, what day it was? Thursday. So about, quote, neoliberalism. So you can check it out. But actually, Matheus, I'm very curious. So what's the narrative of the left? Like who are they fighting? The big businesses are hand in hand with the government because it's such a controlled economy. So who is the enemy in Brazil? Who are the people rising up against?
I mean, the two pivots, of the campaign was that Bolsonaro was a genocide.
Towards whom?
Because he didn't buy the vaccines with 1 month in advance. So then he killed. The reason is like that. He didn't buy the vaccines when Pfizer contacted the government. So it was like a 1 month. Okay. And then right away he bought it, and the vaccination process went a little bit behind the United States one. And then there was like 500,000 people that died.
Okay,
but, you know, this month didn't mean 500,000 people. But the campaigns like that, given this 15-day delay, he killed like 500,000 people.
Right.
So this one of the objectives. And
so Bolsonaro is a bad guy. I get it.
Yeah, he's what else? He committed genocide. And this is the word they used. I'm just telling you what I heard. I'm not making any judgments. And the other was that, for example, the Amazon forest was like being depredated. Like it was all burning in hell, fires for everywhere, which is not the case. In fact, the radar analysis of the region show that right the opposite, the Bolsonaro government had the least impact in terms of deforestation and stuff like that in the Amazon. So this was the second argument used in the campaign.
I saw this today on Twitter that Lula is going to save something like 95% of the Amazon. I'm not sure, like otherwise Bolsonaro
he
would
said yesterday he's taking deforestation to 0%.
Okay.
You know, 0. No deforestation whatsoever.
Okay, so
I don't know how he's going to do that, but you know, because the Amazon is almost like half Europe in terms of area. So I don't know how he's going to do that. He's going to send the army. Even if you put the entire Brazilian army there, aligned side by side, they are not able to cover the trucks and the tanks and everything. They are not able to cover this area. But
it doesn't matter that it's actually going to happen. What matters is he signaled it. He virtue signaled it to the world, and you know,
exactly.
All that matters is that he feels a certain way about it.
Yeah,
one more question before we go to the audience. Actually, a comment and then a question to both of you. The comment is, I've been hearing this thing that Bolsonaro has been what was the term? Sanctioning, let's use our own word, has been sanctioning authoritarian rulers abroad. So he was a political friend with Trump. He was probably political friend with the types of Orban. He was happy with when Meloni won in Italy. But here's what I don't hear from anyone. Lula has been the #1 sanctioner of everyone from the Castros in Cuba, best friends, best closest ally in the area, together with Cuba, of Venezuela. I wouldn't be surprised if he's perhaps the most sympathetic in Latin America, again after Venezuela, towards Iran. I was listening to an interview. I was reading an interview where he said, well, Zelensky and Putin are of equal responsibility for the world in Ukraine. So this is the humanist Lula who is for peace. So that was my comment. Here's the last question I'm putting on the table, gentlemen. Here's what the Machiavellian in me thinks, and tell me if I'm a bit too cynical here. Okay, leftists, here you have the power. Let's see what you're going to do. We are in a period where the economy in the world is in a difficult position. There's not much money around to bail you out. So you made your bet, now sleep on it. How about we see it this way, that, okay, Lula is going to screw up so bad that the left is going to be delegitimized for generations. Is this a Machiavellian plan, or is this completely naive and wrong?
Well, I think we have historical precedent to show us that it's naive and wrong. I mean, you can't get any more messed up than Lenin's government, or Stalin, or Brezhnev, or Khrushchev, or Castro, or any of the other dictators, Pol Pot, that ruled in the name of communism around the world. You can't get
but
any
here we
more...
have elections, they'll tell you. No gulags, no torture chambers, no executions. This is different. Yes,
it's different. It's suicide by vote. You know, it's not murder, but it's suicide by vote. And still they will find a way around, as they always do, a rhetorical way around their complete flub ups, because there's always a scapegoat. They can always turn to a scapegoat and say, we didn't do it enough. There's this individualist or this selfish interest blocking us from being able to purely practice our utopian government. And they've been finding these excuses for over 100 years, and it's not changing, because there's just not the philosophical momentum for individualism out there yet. There's small pockets of us, thank God for Matheus out there doing his thing in Brazil, and you doing your thing in Greece and Europe. There's those pockets of us, but it's not enough to turn the cultural tide at the moment. So they'll make the same excuses they've always made, and it's going to resonate with those people, those statists in the same way.
Matteo.
Until we change it, until we change the moral nature of the argument.
I have some comments on that. I mean, Lula got elected, but the majority in the Senate and in both chambers, right, is consisted of center and Bolsonaro allies. So probably I think the economic damage is not going to be so intense like it was in the first government, because he would have to get approval from the legislature, and probably it's not going to be so easy, for example, to raise taxes, to use the state companies again, like Lula did, because he practically broke all the main state companies. Bolsonaro was able to get them back on the blue. And then probably now what Lula is going to do, he's going to take this profit, spend it all, and give subsidies to say that the gas is with low prices. And so when that is finished, probably the government will be done, or he might try to get another corruption scheme going. We never know. But really, this time the money is short. I mean, Bolsonaro did a great job in terms of the financial. The finance minister did a great job, especially with inflation, decreasing the tax rate, and so they did a lot of great things. But I think there are some culprits to Lula's coming back to power. The first one is Bolsonaro himself. He's really bad. I mean, he has no condition to be a president whatsoever. He's not diplomatic. He's not even a politician. I mean, Lula is, compared to him, Lula is like God in terms of diplomacy. So Lula knows how to handle things, the good and the bad way. He was responsible for the biggest corruption scandal in the world. So he knows something about corrupt people and human nature. I mean, the bad examples of that. So he's a master in that sense. So you need always to be in the lookout because he might attack in the most unexpected way.
That's scary. That's very scary what you're saying.
He's a master in that. So even though he doesn't have the majority in both chambers, in both houses, even though that is the case, you need to be in the lookout because he might come up with any new mensalão, which was the name of the biggest corruption scandal, where he hired like an advertising agency, and through that he paid people, all the politicians he paid, like for services. Of course, no receipts were given, but he did that. He knows how to do that, and he might try to do that again.
So we know what's going to happen now. So initially there's going to be some headlines like, here's how it's done. Brazil takes the profits from the big industries and subsidize energy. In the same way, like in 2009, 2010, I remember reading the minimum wage rises in Venezuela amidst a global financial crisis. Here's the new model. And 3 years later, they were eating cats. And there were riots, and they were shooting.
And socialism still thrives as an ideal in most people's minds until people can integrate the concept that the moral is the practical. And there's no dichotomy between the two. We're going to keep finding ourselves in these absurdities.
And it's really we received. I mean, they are coming. They are still coming. People from Venezuela, Colombia, Chile, Angola. So they come to Brazil to live. So we see the results. It's not just a theory that is not working. We see people, we talk to people. It was funny, like the other day, I was walking in the street here in my city. It is like a 70,000. So it's a small town in Brazil. And it's funny because you are walking in the street and you hear people speaking in Spanish. So what the hell is speaking Spanish? So there are people from Venezuela, Colombia in the corners. So I love I have a translation company. I love languages, but it's quite funny to have people speak another language in the streets because you see the results. They are there because they couldn't stay in their countries. They just didn't have what to eat, where to work. But people seems not to just don't care. Like it's reality doesn't matter. One person, one friend of mine who is a leftist, he said that he was voting with the heart. Voting with the heart.
There you go.
I said, well, I cannot argue with you. How can I argue with your heart? So let's put an end to the discussion and let's take our. Yeah.
If there's hunger, then eat with your heart or find a job with your heart. You should
the same one.
But okay, I have more questions like why do so many of the football stars in Brazil support the right, which is unique. I don't think it happens anywhere in the world. So Neymar, Rivaldo, Giovanni. Okay, Giovanni is bigger in Greece probably than in Brazil. But these people supported Bolsonaro, but I'm always committed for the episode not going above half an hour. So let's see what the audience says. Many thanks to Marilyn. Ashley says, reminds me of Marion Barry getting re-elected. So Marion Barry was a mayor of Columbia, so he had also a comeback in the same way.
He was a crackhead. He was a crackhead in D.C. Wasn't he the mayor of Washington, D.C., and he was a crackhead and got reelected.
Oh, okay. Literally. Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. Thank you, that's Jonathan. Daniel says, Marilyn says, politicians can say they care about the poor, but government never actually helps the poor, and voters don't know how to assess this. It's fuzzy. And again, this is exactly the point. Like what has Lula done for the poor? Not in terms of take some crumbs, takes here some, but in terms of there's not going to be poor anymore. I don't want someone to do something for the favelas. I want to make sure that there are no favelas anymore, and people can create and people can get a better life for them. No one can hand you a better life. You create a better life. You need the freedom to have the space to create that better life.
It is funny because you were talking about favelas. I mean, Lula, I think he has never been to a favela in his life.
Of course.
The criminals there don't like him.
Oh, but I heard that the areas where there are like the corruption and drugs, etc., was the one area that Lula won big.
Yeah, I mean, from the prisons and stuff like that, yes. And most people inside the favelas vote for Lula because the state itself doesn't have any impact there. And so they just, the criminals say, well, you should vote for Lula or for whenever the person I want to, and you go there and you vote. Otherwise, I'm waiting for you outside.
Do the police even go into the favelas?
Sometimes, just to prove that they are there to take some kilograms of drugs here and there. But
so the reason we mentioned the favelas people is because, again, the big project in the 2000s, supposedly for Lula, was to incorporate the favelas. So the idea was that he would create this bridge, sometimes not even metaphorical, like in terms of he had this tram or something that goes to the favelas. So the idea is the favelas are not going to be anymore this isolated island. It's going to be incorporated into our social and political life.
If he really wanted to do that, he could do a good thing in the favelas or any other place, in the sense of like Huerta de Soto's work about Peru, where you give property rights to people, and you give so they can transform that little slum into something they can use to get credit and stuff like that. But there was never a project related to that. It's just about giving money away and stuff like that. So there is no really any kind of preoccupation with the poor, like he says. It's just empty words.
It's
and
political
giving money away.
It's political patronage is what it is. It's buying constituents.
I would endorse him. I would endorse him if he wanted to do that, because I think it's important. As a capitalist, I want people to have property rights. So that would be great. I mean,
right, but that wouldn't extend his patronage and necessarily give him
exactly, because
on him.
Yeah, he wants dependency. He doesn't want independent people to come up. And before we finish, I think it's important to say that, for example, the overall liberty movement here is doing great strides, have had a major impact. But unfortunately, libertarians overall, they are just worried about politics. So, I mean, the impact is small. It's just once in, after 2 years, you can have some kind of impact to elect some official here and there. But the most important thing, which is philosophy overall, ethics, is not touched. So it's just like, for example, if you get many organizations, especially coming from the US, like Students for Liberty and stuff like that, there are no professors coming out of there. It's just people that help with political campaigns.
And there was this movement some years ago, even on the streets. The slogan was "More Mises, less Marx."
Exactly,
which was nice. But as you said, what are the roots? So we're gonna end up with you telling us where people can find more about objectivist activity in Brazil. Before that, let me tell you what's coming next. So 7 p.m. UK time, and notice people, there's a time change in Europe, but not yet in the US, because the central planners are not coordinated. So at 7 p.m. UK time, premiere on the Briefly Objective. That's the channel where ARC UK posts shorter videos, with Yaron Brook on the video Get the Government Out of Education. At 9 p.m. UK time, a special Halloween episode of HBTV with Harry Binswanger. And today, the topic is Kant's Evil Ethics. So the Halloween boogeyman today is can't. So, Matheus, tell us where people can find more about your group and about objectivist activity in Brazil.
Well, in the comment section, there is a link to some of the social media from Objectivism Brazil. We have more than 1,000 articles and videos subtitled into Portuguese. Also, most of the ARCUK courses are also subtitled in Portuguese. You're going to see like a yellow label subtitle, so you can enter directly in the Ayn Rand Institute website as well. And we are trying also to get more Brazilians and Portuguese-speaking people to get to the Ayn Rand University as well, to learn the philosophy the proper way. I mean, there are other ways around here, especially, and around the world, but we do believe that the best way is the Ayn Rand Institute, and we work hard to produce content and prepare people for this experience, which is not easy, but it's really gratifying.
That's great. That's great job, and I'm glad to see it growing and growing. And again, people from the Ayn Rand Institute with whom I've spoken, they are excited with what happening in Brazil. Particularly, Charles Fanny keeps mentioning it as a place where he goes and he gets very excited. Okay, people, we might talk about Brazil again within 2 months because maybe they're gonna win the World Cup. Let's see. They have a new let's see if it's going to become a golden generation, but I predict good things for Brazil in the World Cup. So, Mark, Matheus, thank you very much. Many thanks to our viewers, to our super chatters. Talk soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nikos.
Peace.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks,
Daniel.
Matheus.